Good morning and welcome to Sunday at the Segal. I'm your host, Sarah Deshaies, coming to you from my home to you at your home. It's so nice to see you all and be with you again. The last time we chatted, hard to believe, was last December for Underneath the Lintel at the Segal, which was actually not a live show with an audience. It was live online. So this is our first chat for a live show at the Segal since a year ago, when we were talking about the times they are a-changin', which had a few runs before everything changed in March 2020. But here we are in May 2021, and today we're here to talk about Every Brilliant Thing, a show produced in a pandemic, and we're gonna, as I'll get into, build off that and talk about theater in pandemic times. And what a time to be talking about this as well, because here in Quebec, we have our vaccination rollout happening. We see theaters reopening in other parts of the world. It's a very exciting time. I'll make sure we're all on top of where we are with theaters in Montreal in a couple of seconds. But first, to tell you a little bit about the play Every Brilliant Thing. Opened for the first time yesterday. I was very honored to be in the audience. Every Brilliant Thing was first performed back in 2013. At the Ludlow Fringe Festival in the United Kingdom, and it premiered in New York the following year. It is firstly an adaptation of Duncan Macmillan's short story Sleeve Notes. Secondly, it's a collaboration between the writer Macmillan and Johnny Donahoe, a comedian and a performer, as well as director George Perrin. Now, since its initial staging, hundreds of audiences have seen a variety of iterations of the show, but the basic premise remains this. The narrator recounts to his audience how he was determined as a child to help his mother get through her depression through listing all of the brilliant things that make life worth living. Now, it's a deceptively simple story that packs a life-affirming punch, and it will hopefully lead you to start compiling your own list the moment you leave the theater. I spoke with director Dean Patrick Fleming just last week. He told me that he thinks this show is more relevant now, more than ever in our pandemic times. So yesterday, for the first time I got this number from John Rondeau at the Segal. We believe it's the first time in 416 days the Segal presented this show to a live audience. It's a collaboration with Hudson Village Theatre, where Dean is artistic director. And as I mentioned, I was very privileged to be in attendance. I could not have felt safer. Guests are escorted to their seats. You get a mask, you fill out a form, they take down your phone number, you have hand sanitizer everywhere. And the funny thing is that this is also an interactive play. So the audience is interacting with the main performer, Danny Brochu, reading things aloud, even getting on stage. And every thought has gone into making sure that the audience, the crew, and the performer, Danny Brochu, are safe. So when you see this show, and I hope you will, you're going to remember it not just because it's an excellent play. It's not just going to be memorable because it's your first one in over a year, but also because of the myriad safety precautions, which acknowledge that we're still in a pandemic. We're not quite through this yet. So this brings us to our theme today, producing art and theater in a pandemic. How do you do it? How are artists working and thriving with the many obstacles in their way? How do the rules in the current situation in Montreal compare to theaters and other corners of the world? Today for our Sunday at the Segal, we have gathered together panelists from around the world to talk about creativity in a pandemic. We're going to travel digitally together to talk to very talented and accomplished professionals who will have very different experiences to share. We're going to start off by meeting them. Brandon Bowers is a creative theatrical producer dedicated to unexplored forms of performance, bridging genres, artistic mediums, and communities to make theater accessible to all audiences. They are the producing director of the American Music Theater Project at Northwestern University and have produced 6 shows for the Edinburgh Fringe. Brandon is also creative producer of Get Out Alive, an autobiographical Afro-goth musical by Nikki Lynette, now available to stream online, and we are reaching them in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you so much for
Gerald
having me.
Garuti is a theater director, a playwright, and a dramaturg who has worked on over 45 award-winning plays in France and the UK, actually one of the only French directors based in London. He studied philosophy at Cambridge and literature at the École Normale Supérieure. His credits range from Dangerous Liaisons to Richard III, and he is also Tom Stoppard's French translator, and we reach him in Paris. Welcome, Gerald. Evangelia Cambitas is a singer, songwriter, actor, dancer, and multi-instrumentalist based in Toronto. She has been seen performing in the Hockey Center, the Segal Center production at the NAC, as well as The Adventures of a Black Girl in Search of God, a Black Theater Workshop Centaur NAC production, and musicals like Hadestown and Billy Elliot, just to name a few. Or maybe you've seen her on TV. Some of her work includes Heroes Reborn and The Boys. Her debut album, Feel the Fall, is out now on all platforms, and you can also follow her online. And she is reaching us from Stratford, Ontario, relatively close by for us today. And Thea Williams, finally, is an award-winning theater director, film director, and dramaturg based in Sydney, Australia. She specializes in developing and directing new work across theater and film in Australia, New Zealand, and other countries when borders allow. She has been associate director at both Sydney's Belvoir and the Bush Theatre in London. Thea is also a disability advocate and hosts the radio show and podcast Activated Arts. And we are reaching her in the wee hours of the morning in Sydney, down under. Welcome, Thea. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. So we're going to discuss with our panelists for the next 40 minutes or so. And if you have a question, please hold on to it. But actually, we do have a comment. So put it into the chat anytime you would like. And we're going to take questions at 11:45. We'll have a Q&A and a chat and aim to wrap up a little bit before noon, just in time for lunch. Let's get started. So I'll just situate where we are here in Montreal. Theaters opened roughly 6 weeks ago, I believe, around World Theatre Day in late March. So we've had two openings, two closings, and two reopenings since March 2020. We have theaters like the Segal who are putting on shows with health and safety restrictions and limited audiences, but there hasn't been a return to total normalcy. And for one, we still have a curfew. Today is the last day where curfew is at 8 p.m., goes to 9:30 tomorrow, and that is kind of an imposition on the arts right now. I think we're going to reach normalcy in the next few months as vaccinations continue to roll out. We're hoping to have a first dose for all adults in Quebec by June 24th. So I want to ask our panelists, what is the pandemic journey where you are right now in your city, in your country, from lockdown in March 2020 to today? Why don't we begin with Thea, who's in Sydney right now?
So I feel very blessed to be an Australian and a New Zealander. In some ways, the pandemic was particularly scary for me because I have rheumatoid arthritis, which means that I'm immune compromised. So when the pandemic first hit, I actually left Australia and went straight back down to New Zealand, partly because all of my work moved online, and partly because I needed to care for my parents. My sisters usually do a lot of care for my parents, but because some of them work in the health industry, we needed to get them separated from my quite elderly parents. But both countries went really hard with just locking down all movement, and anyone who came into the country was put in isolation, which I did both in New Zealand and Australia, and it really wasn't too bad. But now our theatres are open and they're at 100% capacity. We basically, because we locked down so early, we haven't had community transmission for this year. We now have travel between New Zealand and Australia open again. So when I directed my first show back last year, that was in October, because it was a musical, we could only have about 50% capacity. But we're now at 100%. And I just hope that we learn all the lessons we need to learn about how to keep people engaged and involved when working remotely. But yeah, things are actually almost back to normal now in Australia. Yeah.
Thank you, Anthea. Perhaps let's go to travel to Paris and ask Gerald what the experience is like right now in France. And you probably also have a perspective in London because you're also based there at times.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, and hi, everybody. Well, we're having a great time in Paris, as you can imagine right now, because all theaters have been locked for 40 months now. So it's been quite unexpected and unheard of since maybe not really the Great Plague, but well, it's been hard times in history generally, but for 40 months, yes, we've been locked. And actually the most difficult thing for everybody is the uncertainty. When do we open? Do we open in 3 months, in 6 months? When? So the good news is that we should be opening in 2 weeks now-ish, 30% capacity, and then, you know, well, escalating to hopefully 100% by the summer. So the festivals, and especially the Festival d'Avignon, the big theatre festival, should be happening. Big news. So yeah, it's been of course a hard time, but it's been a hard time for a lot of people. Of course, for all the actors, artists, stage artists, directors, technicians, but I would say also for the audience members, because I keep bumping into people who tell me, well, we miss it a lot. So I think we should not be blurred and think that the stage, theater especially, or, you know, musicals and so on, they're just something missing for the actors, the people doing it, but people watching it. I mean, we need presence. We need that. I'm sure we're going to talk about it. So, so yeah, and London, well, it's a different story, but it should be opening hopefully. Gabriela, I don't think we can hear you.
So sorry, guys, we're having a little technical difficulty. Would anybody else be willing to answer Sarah's question about how we're coping in different places in the pandemic?
Sure, I can jump in. I don't mind. I'll jump in. Hi, all. Yeah, I'm here in Chicago, so in the United States. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. From basically since March 2020, a lot of things have just been shut down. Theaters closed over that summer. There were a lot of layoffs, cutbacks in budgets as well as personnel. So really our industry took a big hit and continues to. Things now are just starting to open back up. There's a few performances happening here and there, but really, in the United States being so big, a lot of the decisions early on in the pandemic were left up to states and local municipalities to make decisions. Which led to just a lot of confusion and chaos, not only, you know, in the pandemic itself, but also in our industry and how to respond. So folks have been treated differently. There have been theaters that have done complete renovations to do, you know, in-person performances as close as they can. But a lot of things are still just at a pause at the moment. So things are looking to open up, I think, this summer. Right now here in Chicago, we're about at 50% of adults have had at least one shot of the vaccine. So we're reaching towards immunity, but it's going to be a while. So September is hopeful for Broadway opening. I think that's what last was said. But again, it's kind of slow going and really kind of depends on where you are, even in our own country, of how people are responding. But I will say the one performances that have kind of stuck through have been even drive-in performances. Those have been popular. But again, that's only happened in a lot of more rural areas of the country where they have the space in order to bring a lot of cars and do that kind of work. So that's kind of been our industry. It's been a little bit chaotic, but we're looking at the future with hope.
Wow. Thanks, Brandon. I'm just filling in for Sarah as we get the technical difficulties sorted out. So we heard from Gerald, we heard from Anthea, and Evangelia. You know, as we see here, for those of us close to Ontario, oi, but oi. But tell us, you know, how you're doing there, and What's, I mean, especially in Stratford, we're all hoping for some magic to happen this summer.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey the last year, and certainly, living in a small town like Stratford, whose economy kind of depends on the festival and depends on the tourism that the festival brings in. This lovely town has definitely felt the impacts of COVID in ways that other places probably haven't. That said, Ontario seems to be in this vortex of never-ending hell, and we seem to be getting further and further away from getting it under control. But thankfully, the vaccine rollouts have found some momentum, and so I think the plan is sometime in May that anybody, by the end of May, I think anybody over 18 can get vaccinated. So that's exciting. I never wanted to be over 40 more in my life to get my shot. But in terms of, theater, it's been a lot of pivoting. It's been a lot of, I think, and conservatively people hoping for things to happen and then not wanting to make announcements. And then, we get another lockdown or we have everything shift. But a lot of companies in this province are pivoting to outdoor performances. The Stratford Festival here is hoping to do some performances this summer. The plan is to do those under some tents at the new Tom Patterson Theatre and also at the Festival Theatre, which should be very exciting and harkens back to the days when the festival first started. Musical Stage Company in Toronto is doing their Porchside songs again this summer, hopefully waiting to see what when Toronto comes back into a gray zone and allows for gatherings of 10 people outside. And there's some other stuff happening here in Stratford as well. The Here for Now Festival is happening in August. And everything is just sort of contingent on public health rules. So we're certainly trying. It's not easy and we just have to be flexible, but people like Gérald was saying, they want it. It's not just the actors that are hungry for it. Audiences want it and are keen to come back and are, just really there to support the arts once it's a go,
Well, so that is indeed the interesting question and something we've been asking ourselves at the Segal Center. We're not out of it yet. We have small audiences and we see it very differently on the French side too. They're more, I think they're coming back faster. Maybe, Anthea, because you said it's almost back to normal. And we know in Australia, Hamilton's even happened to full capacity. What are you seeing, can you give us some inspiration on the audience end? It's hard to imagine everyone actually coming back to normal. How is it where you are? How is that feeling, on the audience end, do you think?
Honestly, really safe. But we are in a really lucky situation. We had incredibly high compliance with people staying home and then using masks. So we literally, we haven't had community transmission really since January. So because of that, we can go back to 100. Now we're at the point where when you meet people, you say, are you hugging? And then you go to hugging.
Wow.
Audiences have been so hungry to go back to theatre and they've been really grateful to go back. And now we're just at the point where you can be in a theatre and not necessarily wear a mask, which is lovely as well. I have to say, I directed a musical in October and we couldn't have audience in the first 5 rows. And then we had to have them separated. And the nature of the way that musical was written to have transitions happening with an audience clapping. And it just felt sad to me that it was this, clap of, a very small group of people in quite a big audience. So it's great to be back to full houses. But I've missed out on shows because I haven't booked in time, which is great. And Sydney is not always a city where everything always sells out immediately. Hamilton has been incredibly well received. But I actually think the bigger takeaway is, what do we not want to lose? What have we learned? that we really need to take forward to make sure that we keep on allowing people to access theatre, which I think is a conversation it would be lovely to come to later in the discussion. But no, audiences have been really happy to be back in the theatre. And at the same time, I have to say, New Zealand and Australia haven't been particularly hard hit. We've had less than 1,000 deaths. The majority of those were in Victoria, and that's not where I'm based. I'm based in Sydney, where we've had less than 100 deaths. So, at the moment, we're in a very difficult situation with our vaccine rollout, and some of our quarantine has become, well, in my opinion, really problematic and quite racist, because we've made it illegal for people to return from India if they're Australian citizens, which I think is wrong. I think it's actually about bringing those people home and quarantining them really well and looking after them. But having said that, the quarantine situation has meant that we're in quite a safe situation. But yeah, audiences want to be there. People are happy to be back in groups.
Thank you for sharing that. So you touched upon something about what's now going to stay, and maybe this is a nice way to segue into the art that we're all making. What are we doing? Gérald, I'll start with you over in Paris. What are you kind of excited to be working on and looking for in the future now? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. There we go.
So I was actually, as we say in French, I was drinking your words. Boire tes paroles. Sorry. So yeah. Well, indeed, the present invites us to plan and imagine the future, because that's what we as artists are supposed to do. Well, we're supposed to invent worlds and present worlds to the audience and share it. And so I have an announcement to make, something which is unheard of. That is, I'm working now on the first ever bilingual show in Canada. That is with French-speaking and English-speaking actors on the same stage. And that's a project I've been working on for 3 years now with Productions UP, that is 3 producers based in Montreal, Véronique Bosset, Maud La France, Elodie Laurent Martin. And we're working on that with the French-speaking dramaturg Annick Lefebvre. And it's going to be, something fantastic, because it's a revolution we've been working on together, through Zoom for the last couple of months, of course. And the idea is to take on the Tartuffe I've been doing in London a couple of years ago, which was bilingual, French-speaking actors and English-speaking actors. And yeah, that's this one. That's Audrey Fleurot and Paulin de Saint, a French actress and British actor. And the idea is to do that in Canada with actors, on the same stage, because I know that they don't exactly have this kind of habit. So Annick Lefebvre and another English-speaking dramaturg in Canada are working at the moment on new versions of Tartuffe in Québécois and in English. And it's going to be addressing the issues which are important to me and actually to us. That is, how could we cohabit with 2 languages in the same country? What's one nation with different identities? What is female desire? What is for a woman not to be only the object of desire, but the subject of desire? And what do we do with the fascination of fanaticism and religion? How do we address that? So that's something I think very exciting, and we've been working on deeply, and that's going to be in at the Place des Arts in Montreal, and it's going to be in Toronto, hopefully at the Elgin or Winter Garden Theatre Centre. So that's a joint project, and so to tell you, it's about bringing together cultures. I think, just to finally answer your questions, we're in a world where at the same time we're very much apart, because we can't be together in the same place. We can't have this physical presence, but we are connected through different means. And I'm really interested as a director to bridge cultures, languages, and so on. This is why when Productions have invited me to this project, bridging the two languages, I was extremely excited to take it from London to do complete new versions, especially for Canada. So in a nutshell, for one project, that's what I'm working on at the moment.
That's amazing. Just promise you'll come visit us at the Segal while you're not too far downtown. And if when I think it was in the 90s, maybe people can correct me in the comments, but we had a bilingual production of Les Mis, and it's all everyone talked about for 10 years. So we love that. We love that in Montreal. It's not always easy to happen to find those same casts, but it's wonderful that you're doing it. We're so excited this is very exciting. Thank you for sharing. So Brannon, like what's happening? What are you excited to be working on, and or that you want to? Doesn't even have to be real yet.
Yeah, honestly, over this pandemic, so I work for the American Music Theater Project at Northwestern. So we mainly focus in the development of new work, specifically musicals. So what I've been excited by is that in this time, even though productions and performances have had to stop, I've still been able to develop work that, we've adapted to Zoom the best we can, but, developing work can still happen. And my theory on any production is that really there's no final iteration of it, that you can always find something new or be mined in the next production of, that it's not meant to be copied, but built upon and evolved. So honestly, what I worked on over this pandemic was Get Out Alive, which is an autobiographical musical by Nikki Lynette. We first developed it at AMTP in 2019 with our first workshop, and then was able to be in Steppenwolf Theater Company's Lookout series in January 2020. So that's what that picture is from. So we skated in literally right before the pandemic hit. We sold out all of our run at Steppenwolf, and then we're in conversation with like next steps with other theaters, both here on the East Coast, and everything shut down. So we got back together as a group to see what we could maybe make on our own, since the piece itself kind of lends itself to technology. There's a whole projection video component to it that we thought could really lend itself to adapting to a virtual environment. So we started working together over the summer, mainly just to come up with what we could, but also to support one another. It was pretty much the whole same cast and team, Roger Ellis, Nikki Lynette, to really also help each other through the time we were in, not only the pandemic, but the incredible social unrest we were seeing and protests around Black lives. Being able to create a community that was actually supporting each other. The piece itself is around mental health, around really advocating for a frank look at how we address mental health in our society through Nikki's specific story. So we have to practice that in what we were also doing. So we kept on doing that for months, not knowing what the final iteration was. And then one thing led to another. An investor came in. We were able to find a place that we could film outside, since film was one thing kind of getting back to normal here. We took 3 days. We filmed it. I went through my first editing process ever. And aimed then to release it basically 1 year from our Steppenwolf date, but this time online in a 4-part digital series, which is available at igetalive.com. So we were really able to take what was originally on stage, theorize and really work over this time using technology, using Zoom meetings, using camera phone footage, using professional filmed footage on a set, all together to create a new medium of what we thought was theatrical performance, but in a virtual environment. So that was my big foray this past year into kind of translating theater into the virtual digital realm. And what I'm excited by is taking what we learned from there, and hopefully in this next Get Out Alive isn't done. You can go see it now, but it's not it. That's not it. We're going to continue, hopefully get back in person once we can, and use elements from the digital version in that. So again, continues to evolve, continues to develop. So performance doesn't become stagnant, but rather a living and breathing thing in our society, which I am hopeful is what can come from this time.
Well, I think is another example to this international panel is the fact that we can all now access things that we would have never seen before. And we're going to put that, Brandon, if you can just type the link into what you were talking about, because this has been the coolest thing. Unfortunately, there's only so much time that we have to watch so many things. So if you're watching this now, again, thank you for spending the time with us, because we know there's just so much to watch. And not everyone could make that digital shift. I know there's a lot of theater artists that are having trouble with that. So congratulations for that. In itself. Evangelia, you're listening to all of this now, and I'm coming to you. As an actor, a creator, of course, of your own, but for these listening to Gerald and Brandon and Anthea as directors and developers, what can you share with us from an actor perspective right now? Like, what's that feeling?
Yeah, it's I think for the better part of the last year, it's been really difficult to see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's felt like, and I can only really speak for Ontario because that's where I am. But also my friends across the country. Every time we sort of get close to being able to maybe do something, then another wave comes and shuts things down. And so it's been really hard to keep morale up. And I think for a lot of us, it's been really hard to find the energy or the fuel to create anything during this time. I know for myself, as a songwriter, a lot of people, when the pandemic first hit and we realized that it was going to shut things down for a long time, were like, "Oh, great, are you going to write your second album?" And I said, absolutely not. Like all the energy that I have right now is going to me staying alive and staying as healthy as I can mentally and physically. And I had no interest or desire to create music, which is generally my outlet. And a lot of people that I know felt the same way. So I think that as we've continued, as the sort of first shock of the reality of the pandemic set in, and when summer came and it got a bit warmer, I think people started to relax a bit more and were a little bit more willing to create or to make some art or to collaborate. I did end up doing a few online things, which is sort of weird, but also kind of fun in its own way. I was lucky enough to be part of the Canadian Musical Theatre Writers Collective, I think is what it's called, with Jonathan Monroe and Landon Braverman, and sing some new musical theater pieces from Canadian composers and writers. And so I got to do that at the end of August. And we did that, recorded it all at home and then put it up on, I think it was on StreamYard as well, and then did an interview. And so that was great, just to get to exercise some of those muscles again. And then, collaborating with some choreographers to work on the Canadian Movement Project, and have, working with Lindsay Britton and having her choreograph to one of my songs in my album. And so that was a really special thing as well. And those are things that I probably never would have done otherwise, but the pandemic has sort of presented these opportunities to connect with people that I may not get to meet in my day-to-day life. In June of this year coming up, I'm hopefully going to be doing the Musical Stage Company's Porchside Songs with Joelle Blackman, who I did Hadestown with in Edmonton, and she went off to do it in New York. And so she was on Broadway with it. But, Joelle and I would never have been available at the same time to do this collaboration if it wasn't for the pandemic. So I'm trying to find those silver linings where we can. And, we're getting closer, having theaters, big theaters, small theaters start to announce seasons and have plans, gives us all some hope. It's been great that film and TV has sort of was shut down for a little bit, but has picked up, and a lot of people are booking and working on set. And I was on set a few weeks ago, and that feels really safe. They're very, very good about their COVID testing, and everybody is in PPE, and they have COVID monitors that make sure everybody is wearing their masks when they should be, and it's really like it's understandable why that industry has been able to keep running, because they're very, very much on it. They have the means to be on it in that way, so that's great. So it's just been an adjustment, and we're all pivoting, and we're all doing different things now to support ourselves. And, I just got a job working for a software company because I need to pay the bills. And so, that's okay. It's giving ourselves the grace to accept that we have to do things differently right now. And that, eventually we will get back to being able to do what we love to do. but we just have to make sure we're doing it safely for ourselves and for everybody that's watching. So I think that's sort of where people are at in our community in Canada anyway.
Thanks, Evangelia. I'll jump back in here. Sorry, I had some technical issues. The point you said about film and TV work continuing, I think we all kind of got a glimpse behind the scenes when the Oscars happened last Sunday. I thought that was fascinating because it's so strange to be at home watching lots of TV and movies, as I think we've all done, and wondered, seeing people kiss and get close to each other feels so alien. But I think, the audience, we all kind of got that glimpse behind the scenes when it was laid out at the very beginning, when we're not filming, masks on, everything is very strict. It's incredible to see how that's worked and that there's opportunities for actors and artists to be in that industry. Now, there's been a huge reckoning in the arts world right now, and so many different walks, so many different parts of our lives as well. An agent towards social change, inclusion. I'm curious to see if there's any steps forward that you've taken in the past year, or something that you've worked towards, or something that you've been observing. I'm not sure who would like to start with that. Maybe Thea. Yes, hands raised in Sydney. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would love to talk to that issue. When it comes to going to theatre, I don't have a lot of access issues, but I run a podcast that is about artists with disability, and I run it with an amazing woman called Hannah Cormack. I count Hannah as one of my greatest friends. We have spent about 1 minute in the same space, and Hannah was in a full face gas mask at that time. Her immune system is such that she very rarely leaves her home. So Hannah is the person who does the What's On with me every month. And every month she talks about two shows. One show that she wishes she could see, and one show that has access enabled so she can see it. And I think when theatre makers think about access, we think about how to get wheelchair seats into our theatre. And that, of course, is really important. But there are so many different types of access. And Hannah is a remarkable theatre maker. And I just think it's so important that we don't lose the digital access that we have created, because it is very clear that audiences want to come. Live theatre is amazing, and I just think Every Brilliant Thing is the most perfect play to come back with, because it is a play that is absolutely live theatre and working so completely and beautifully with an audience. But that's not something that is accessible to everyone, and for a whole range of reasons. I did a show in October last year, and we did a live stream. And because we did a live stream, not only did people manage to come who usually wouldn't have access to a theatre, a friend of mine who had a really young baby and was breastfeeding came. An 85-year-old friend of mine came who usually wouldn't have travelled quite that far to get out that late at night. And one of my actors had a ridiculously large following in Germany. So we had his entire fan club from Germany watch his musical in Sydney. And it's been so heartening to see how quickly theatre could make that happen. Unfortunately, what I've also seen here in Australia is now that things have opened up, some theatres have very quickly stopped doing that. The Adelaide Festival, which is one of our biggest arts festivals in Australia, didn't have a single thing that was available to watch digitally. And I just think the disability community have been asking for this access for so long. And as soon as we had a pandemic, everyone was working at home from Zoom, and we can't take back the lessons we've learned from that.
So hopefully we'll see shows continue back to normal, but also still keeping that live stream option available for the many people who wouldn't be able to see it otherwise. That's fantastic. Brandon, do you have any thoughts about this shift in thinking over the last year or so?
Yeah, a little bit. I touched a little bit on the digital front. I think I agree with Anthea a lot about the access as far as the digital aspect. I think here in the US, I think what we're grappling with, and I think need to grapple with alongside all of that, is first and foremost the We See You White American Theater demands that were made back in 2020. These were, I would say, this is a love letter to our industry from BIPOC folks here in the US around treatment of BIPOC folks in our industry and how we view that. If you have not seen it, I highly encourage you to look it up. But a lot of organizations are grappling with a lot of those questions and demands from there. And I think starting that as a starting off place, and then looking at both leadership and how we choose works, market it, develop works, to make it a more holistic and live up to the ideals I think theater has always been preaching. This also goes to like unsafe workplaces also being addressed in this time, new change in leadership, all the way from Broadway to storefront theater. Just a couple of years here in Chicago, we had a local storefront theater have similar issues as well. And these are not unique. These have been happening. So I think as we're in this time of pause, as we're in this time of reimagining what theater looks like, it can't just be what the final product is, but also where have we not built in systems of accountability to make sure we're actually supporting the communities we wanted to put on stage, or we want to engage in our community programming, who we want to come into our theater and see our new work. There's a lot of other work I think that needs to happen there, and it's been happening. There's new leadership coming through, but it's a long journey. And I just, at least in the American theater, I think not missing that piece as we return will decide whether companies continue to actually exist or whether they become obsolete.
Thank you, Brandon. Gerald, what's your viewpoint from across the pond? Same conversations happening there?
Well, clearly, we have to reinvent ourselves. I was really sorry to hear about Evangelia, you having to to do this other job to survive, and I'm sorry to hear many of my friends are in the same situation, actors especially, and I have friends who basically changed course of life because of that. So the question is, how do we not collapse, but reinvent ourselves and imagine maybe new ways? And I think, hopefully, in the world coming afterwards, this afterward will come someday, hopefully soon. We have to keep the best of two worlds. I don't think theater will die. I think theater is an art which is 25 centuries old, and it will remain because we need presence, we need physicality, we need to be there at the same time. This is why it's so difficult nowadays not to be in the same room, to share simple things like, hugging, as you were saying, or joining, or sharing a drink or something, and sharing a play, something. So we need this experience. That will not change as long as we're humans, and hopefully we will remain human as long as possible. But we, of course, will keep this best thing the digital world has brought to us, and which we had to develop nowadays. And for instance, I've been, just two examples. I don't want to be too long on that, but I worked with Harry Lloyd, this actor, this genius actor. I worked on 2 shows at the RRC and then in London. We worked on the adaptation from the show we've done, Dostoevsky, Notes from Underground, into a short film. So that is, taking this material and transforming it for the audience. That is to bring to an audience something that we had done on stage. And another way of doing it was live digital theater, as you mentioned, Brandon, that is, to try to cross different kinds of forms to give it to the audience. But at the moment, I think there's a kind of indigestion of that. There's so many things that people can't absorb that anymore. And there's too many things to be seen. So we are overloaded with that. So I can't wait for the theater to reopen so people will be able to choose. Because when you go to the theater, you have to make a choice. You're not in front of Netflix, browsing for 2 hours. Oh, what I'm going to see. You have to go to somewhere. You have to sit in an audience theater, and you have to watch something. So I think we basically will keep the best of these two worlds.
Well said. Evangelia, I'd love to hear your comments before we move on from this question to take questions from the audience. I think you have an interesting perspective in Stratford, where there's been a lot of interesting conversations dating back to a year.
Yeah, absolutely. Gerald said theater's not going anywhere. He's absolutely right. And it's the human connection, the human experience. And I think, we need to expand that lens of the human experience beyond the white human experience, which I think has really dominated theater and theater production, theater creation for, hundreds of years. Because it's more often than not the safe bet for a lot of companies is to tell stories that people either know or that have been deemed universally relatable. But what that does is it erases an entire group of people. It erases BIPOC individuals, BIPOC stories. So, in Stratford, when Black Lives Matter movement kicked up again last June after George Floyd's murder, there was a lot happening, and this is a very small, conservative, white Ontario town. And so as a Black woman living in a town like this, it can be quite scary at times to be here. Generally, everybody in Stratford is lovely and very kind and welcoming. But there are moments that I have experienced and my friends of color have experienced that are like overtly racist. There are instances that would make your skin crawl, So having the Stratford Festival provide a platform for the Black artists and the Indigenous artists to speak and to educate and to talk about our lived experiences, that was a very big deal. The festival has been taking steps to create a safer, more inclusive and aware workplace, which I think is very, very important. Is that going to get fixed overnight? Absolutely not. It's going to take a very, very long time. It's what happens when you can see what needs to be fixed, but it's centuries of habit and centuries of treating people a certain way that you have to break. That takes a very, very long time. It takes a very long time to rebuild trust with the communities that you have marginalized, and to make us feel like we're not just tokens for your funding or whatever it is. So, but you also can't. It's like if you're trying to teach a dog a trick, if the dog doesn't get it right the first time, you can't get mad at the dog. You have to keep trying and trusting that eventually they'll get it. So we have to sort of take it for what it is, take it at face value and recognize that steps are trying to be made and mistakes are going to happen. But it's the accountability that an organization has to take to better itself that matters. Right. So yes, they're going to make mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes, but how are you going to continue to learn and grow and remedy those mistakes and create a safe and inclusive space for your actors of color? Something as simple as getting me a mic cord that matches the color of my skin. That's such a simple, small thing, but it doesn't happen automatically. Like you have to really sometimes push for that. Which is silly. Why shouldn't I have a microphone that hides in my skin? So I think that we're making strides. I think that starts though also at the administrative level of these organizations. You have to have diversity in the higher up in the admin offices. You have to reflect your employees and the world in the people that you hire to run an organization. If you don't do that, then you don't have people with different perspectives and different life experiences that can say, well, this is actually, not how I would experience it or my community would experience it. This is where the sort of that trickle down gets lost if it's just white, and you don't have anybody higher up who can offer a different perspective. So I think that's also a big part of it. All these conversations we've been having for the last year have certainly forced organizations to turn the camera on themselves and see where they need to make changes. And also, I think a lot of BIPOC actors, performers, writers, creators, you name it, no longer really have the patience for it. I think people are less afraid to say no to work if it doesn't feel like it's coming from a supportive and inclusive space, because it's very tiring. It's very, very tiring to be constantly on guard, waiting for the next comment to be made, or whether it's intentional or unintentional. The microaggressions get to you, so it's got to start at the top, and it's got to be reflected down that way.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences, Evangelia. I think it's enlightening for all of us to hear that, and so encouraging to hear that those conversations are finally happening in this hallowed, as you say, it's a small town, but a hallowed place for theater in Canada. Yep. We have a question from Patrick, viewing online. Curious if there has been an equivalent shift in how audiences consume theater compared to how theater practitioners have shifted their ways of making theater? I'll throw that open to anybody who'd like to tackle that question from Patrick. Takes a second to think of that one, I think. It's a bit tricky.
Well, I think yes, of course, there's been a shift in how audiences are viewing theatre. Audiences have lived through Black Lives Matter. Audiences have lived through Me Too and Weinstein. I think, with any time you put on a classic, you can recreate every part of a classic except for the audience that it was originally written for. So of course our audiences are hopefully radically changing with us, and I really think they are. And I think that any theatre that just thinks it can keep on programming the same work that it was going to program a decade ago is going to lose its audiences. Absolutely.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, I think that's yet to be seen here, because I think we until we have live and something in person more, and something maybe closer to what Anthea has down under right now, we won't really sure. I think we lost some of that. Those people who just want a live experience, that moment to be in a room together, experience something, have the atmosphere, have the cathartic, empathetic moment of connection and storytelling. And I think we've been able to achieve some of that digitally, but I think some folks won't ever have that until they're offered that in-person experience again. So I think they're hungry for it, but they're also, I think, hungry for whatever we are ready to do in person again. So I think, like Anthea said, we can't do the same thing we did a decade ago. These people are going to come back and be so hungry that we need to make sure we're pushing them as far as what we can maybe create in this time. So yeah, I think they're shifting with us. I just have no way to tell at this moment.
Wait and see, wait and see. Wondering if there's anything that you have learned this past year, maybe about yourself or about your genre, of what you would like to, something you'd like to bring forward as you move forward in your own work in the years to come.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind jumping in on that. I think that, this harkens back to what I was just saying a moment ago. I no longer want to do work that doesn't feel good for my spirit and my mental health. And that doesn't mean I always have to do something that's super heavy or deep or whatever. But, I had said this to an agent of mine years ago, that I no longer wanted to go out for stereotypical roles that were very tokeny, and I still don't want to do that. The difference being that now I don't really care if I have to speak out in a room to stand up for what is right for myself or another marginalized person in a cast. I don't really care what the outcome of that is. And that's not to be disrespectful, but it is to just say, we have to change somewhere. And so I have to be brave enough to do that. And it can be very scary in those rooms to say something and to call out somebody. And to be clear, I would never do it in a disrespectful way, but I would also make sure that everybody feels protected. So yeah, I'm not afraid to just sort of call it out. Certainly now, it feels easier to do that now than it would have felt a year ago, or 2 years ago, or whatever. So I think that's what I've learned, is that the only way that change happens is if you use your voice. And so I'm going to use my voice. And, last year there was a big, in June, there was the hashtag in the dressing room that the Stratford Festival had initiated. And it was all these stories from Black artists of things that had been said to them, either in the dressing room or in rehearsal or on a job. And some of the stories were horrendous. And I tweeted a bunch of my stories, and I said, and I called out specific theaters where things had happened. And I said, I may never work again, but you know what? That's okay, because we need to fix this. So that's what this year has given me, for sure. I I don't care anymore. And I mean that with the most respect. I'm not going to try to protect people's feelings if they are doing something that is hurtful to a community.
Thank you, Evangelia. I'll leave it to the other three panelists. Anything that you've learned about yourself or about what you're doing that you're going to keep in the years to come?
I'll offer just that I had this thought before, somebody had mentioned to me, but I really think theaters and practitioners, producers, artists, we need to rethink of how we engage our communities with performance, and that work can't continue to be just somewhere where we are treasuring art, but rather how is the art influencing the community in that relationship? Because those are the folks who you're actually making it for. Whether that be art that is specifically social change oriented around mental health, like Every Brilliant Thing or Get Out Alive, or whether, it's how you're engaging maybe the youth in your community. But really, I think what I've learned is we have to rethink what marketing and community engagement looks like in our theaters as how many bodies can we get into our space, but rather how can we actually engage human beings in the work that we're creating. I don't have an answer, but I think it's something to really mine and reimagine that relationship.
And Thea or Gerald, either of you want to take the last word about what you've learned and what you're gonna bring forward?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to comment on that. Well, I've been quite mesmerized, not to say terrified, to see how much violence escalated in terms of hatred amongst people, because throwing names at each other and without the ability to talk to each other. So I had the feeling that this moment of lockdown, the impossibility to bring people together, and especially with the social networks, going to the fastest way, the hardest way, making things, I would say, tougher, harder, and more, I would say more schematic in some way. So I really decided to focus on trying to bring this capacity of dialogue back, or higher. And I think theater is a perfect means, because that's the art of dialogue amongst each other. That's the dialogue between actors, between the actor and the audience, and so on. So what I'm focusing now is launching in Paris, and not only in Paris, hopefully in France, a center in which we can, I would say, learn again to have this dialogue, this debate in a way which is not killing each other, but dialoguing, understanding each other, exchanging each other, and using some tremendous art like theater to be able to do it. And I think it's a matter of political, social, and human stakes here. I think we have to do that if we don't want to end up in a world with bunkers and people just hitting each other without even being able to talk to each other. And I completely understand what Evangelia and Brandon were saying about this, this wanting to be able to speak out without not being, feeling diminished or something like that, and to be able to have this space of dialogue and be able to understand each other. I think that's something crucial, and that's something I think art, and especially theater, can help us to achieve.
So finding your voice and using it, engaging with your audience, and finding new people and new audiences as well, and also dialoguing within the community. And Thea, can I leave you with the last word about what to bring forward in 2021?
Yeah, look, thinking about what I really don't want to let go of is I've really missed my theatre community, particularly as I was in another country for a while. And it's really made me realize how much I love and value that connection, and also that connection with that audience, but also slowing down a bit and not being in a constant programming cycle, and getting to really invest in development and have some longer conversations and some longer thoughts. I've really enjoyed that time to invest in my community in a different way. And I think what we all need to do is care for our communities a lot more than we have been. And we need to listen to our communities a lot more than we have been. And in some ways, the pandemic gave us a chance to to rethink about what was important and how we care for others. And I know walking out of a series of very intense lockdowns in Australia and New Zealand, a lot of people talked about how much they enjoyed that time, and how much stepping back and slowing down was important. And clearly our communities and our planet do need us to focus on connection and what's important. And I really hope that we take board.
Maybe we can call this movement slow theater, perhaps, if I can put forward a possible a possible name for it. I love that idea as well. So with that, we're going to wrap up our conversation for today. Obviously, the stories that you've shared and the thoughts you've shared are going to stay in our minds, I think, for ages. But we'll wrap up the conversation for today. A very big and hearty thank you to our many guests all over the world. Brannon Bowers, who joined us from Chicago, Illinois, and Thea Williams in Sydney, Australia, where it is nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, I think. And Gerald Garuti in Paris. He's also based in London from time to time. And right here in our own backyard, Stratford, Ontario, Evangelia Cambites. Thank you so much. And do say hello to us when you guys are in Montreal next time. Hopefully borders lifting and everything's safe and when that time comes. A big thank you to Gabriela Saltiel, who put this panel together, to Debbie as well, to Lisa Rubin, Executive and Artistic Director at the Segal Center, who also jumped in for me earlier on when I had some technical difficulties, as well as the whole entire wonderful team at the Segal Center. And of course, thank you at home for attending today, for contributing your excellent questions and comments. Enjoy the rest of the day. Please go see Every Brilliant Thing. Stay safe and be well.
Thank you.